Shalom, my dear friends. Shalom. Today, the 13th day of the month of Elul of the year 5777. And continuing today with our studies, thank God, in the Holy of Holies, the book of Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, and continuing with the letters of the Aleph Bet with the letter Dalet today, and continuing with our study of Rabbi Nachman's teaching on the hidden light. And with that, my dear friends, let us go straight into our studies of Tanakh, of Shir HaShirim. Shalom, today the 13th day of the month of Elul of the year 5777, corresponding to the 4th of September of the year 2017. And today we enter into the continuation of Shir HaShirim, into the very beautiful mutual praises between the Holy One, blessed be He, the lover, and His beloved, the Knesset Israel, the Assembly of Israel. And as we have mentioned, each time that we read Shir HaShirim, the song to Shlomo, to the king that peace is his, as a devotional offering of our lips, recounting his love with us and our love of him, we can see ourselves in the great span of history of the people of Israel that is included in Shir HaShirim. And now as we come to the beginning of the third parasha of Shir HaShirim, which begins in verse 9 of chapter 1, we really now come to the a very beautiful section which will be continued in the next rather lengthier parasha, where the two participants, the two chief participants in this love song, are exchanging praises one to the other. And it starts with the lover, whose words we had heard at the end of the previous parasha, where the beloved had asked, "Where can I find you? Where are you grazing your flocks?" And he said, "If you don't know, then go by the go in the footsteps of the flock where the shepherds are encamped." And immediately afterwards, in the new section, the third parasha, the lover bursts into a very extraordinary praise of his beloved in verse 9. L'susosi berichvei Pharaoh, di misich ra'ayosi. Here now he calls her his beloved ra'ayosi, the Hebrew word re'ah, as in the verse in Leviticus chapter 19, V'ohavto l're'acho kamocha. Re'ah is a dear friend, one that you love. The word re'ah is related to the Aramaic word ra'ava, which means favor, corresponding to the Hebrew word ratzon, favor and good feelings. So now he addresses her as Ra'ayosi, my beloved, my companion, where before he had addressed her as Hayofa Benoshim, you are the most beautiful woman of women, but now he has singled her out for himself in this word. And it's rather surprising perhaps to us to find that the Holy One, blessed be He, is apparently addressing his beloved as similar to his horse in the Richbei Pharaoh, in the chariots of Pharaoh, because of course throughout the 5 books of Moses from Exodus onwards, Pharaoh indeed has a somewhat negative connotation. It is Pharaoh, that is the king of an Egypt that is enslaving Israel. And here God is comparing his beloved, the Holy One, to Susosi, to my horse in the chariots of Pharaoh. Well, as we shall see later on, there are many midrashic teachings that come out of this verse, seen in the context of the wider midrash in the direction of Yonatan ben Uziel in his Aramaic Targum, where he relates this to God's fighting the horses of Egypt at the time of the crossing of the Red Sea with some kind of celestial spiritual forces. The horse indeed is the most noble and one of the most beautiful of the animals, and not for nothing was chosen particularly by kings as their method of transport. The humble and the poor go on chamor, on a donkey, like Abraham going to Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac, Vayachavosh es chamoro, and Mashiach coming in riding as a poor man on a donkey. But the noble horse is a tremendously beautiful animal with its wonderful ability to run, and while drawing chariots and carriages, the horse is somewhat less suitable for the kind of agricultural work that oxen and donkeys were required to do. So particularly here, as we shall see in the commentary of Metzudat David, which we are now following, he explains it as follows. He says on verse 9, you, my beloved, indeed I have compared you as against all of the other maidens to a female horse that is bound to the chariot of Paro, of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Pharaoh, he explains, is a generic name for the kings of Egypt. But let's recall that when Solomon built his temple, he also committed the very bold act that eventually led to his downfall of marrying the daughter of Paro, thereby reversing the historical inequality seemingly between Israel and Egypt that had existed from the time of the exile of the children of Israel in Egypt. Indeed, when Abraham had gone to Egypt and Pharaoh had captured Sarah, he was forced to release her, and it is said that Pharaoh's daughter Hagar went after Abraham and preferred to be the handmaiden of Abraham and not the daughter of King Paro. And we also see later the concept of Batia, the daughter of Paro, converting and accepting the Torah, she who indeed drew Moses out of the waters. So we see the very differing relations between Egypt, represented in Paro, to Israel and the souls of Israel. But here, Metzudat David is saying that the horse of Paro, the horse in the chariot of Paro, is the best of all of the horses of Egypt. We find in a book of Kings, in the account of King Solomon's reign and the account of the horses that he had, how the very best horses did come from Egypt. So this is indeed a mashal, a comparison of a very great power in those times. Here is the leading nation in the region. The other locations that we hear of in Shir Hashirim outside of Israel are mainly Damascus, which was the capital to the north. So here we see how in the setting of this pastoral love song between a lover and his beloved, the shepherds, the guardians of the orchards. Nevertheless, there is an international dimension to all of this. This is a true king addressing his beloved, that is a true princess. Going on then with the explanation of Metzudat David on this verse. The Nimshal in this verse is to say that you, my beloved, are more beloved to me than all of the families of the earth, even than the choicest of all of them. Very high praise. His first praise of the beloved in Shir HaShirim. And then he goes on in verse 10, Novu l'choyayich batorim tzavorech b'charuzim. Novu l'choyayich, novu, as in the verse in Isaiah, Manovu alehorim ragdeh mavaser, how beautiful on the mountains are the feet of the one that comes to proclaim the news. Novu, how beautiful, na'eh, how beautiful are l'choyayich, your cheeks, your jawbones, batorim, in the rows of ornaments. Have in mind here the very beautiful ornaments that the brides of Teiman, of Yemen, are bedecked in over their faces with rows and rows of precious jewels or of metal ornaments of silver and of gold. Novelu chayach batorim, when your jaws are bedecked with these rows of ornaments, that is when their beauty is brought out through the addition of these ornaments. Savorech b'charuzim, your neck, which later is described so nobly later on in Song of Songs, your neck b'charuzim, when it has the necklaces that have precious jewels held on threads. So have in mind here those ornaments of these Yemenite brides, because we are indeed talking here in Shir HaShirim of the marriage and the union of the lover and his beloved. So on verse 9, Metzudat David, on verse 10, it says, Novul chayach batorim, your cheeks are beautiful in those rows of ornaments. He says, Noim, they are beautiful and fit to bind them with these rows of ornaments, and your neck indeed is fit and worthy to adorn it with with necklets of precious stones and of pearls. And the nimshal here, he says, is that you are fit and worthy for God to send you his great goodness. Well, we shall see in the Targum that here there are allusions to the gifts that God gave to Israel at Sinai, the 2 tablets of stone and the 10 commandments and the other adornments, and all of these are in the mashal pictured as the adornments of the bride. Verse 11, Torah zohov na'aseloch im nekudas hakosef. Torah zohov, we shall make for you rows of gold ornaments. Im nekudas hakesef, with the points, the little globules of silver. Metzudat David saying here now, it moves into the future, having said that her cheeks and her neck are fit for these things. He then goes to say, this is the beloved saying, Na'aseloch, let us make for you these Torah Zahav, these rows of gold. Says Metzudat David, since your cheeks and your neck are so fit to adorn them, thus we shall do to you. We shall have them bedecked in the rows of gold with the silver points. And this would be, he says, a most exceptionally beautiful ornament. And the Nimshal is to say that since you are fit for all of this goodness, I will indeed send it down to you. I will send this shefa, this blessing of all of this to you. So these have been the words of the lover and his very great praises of the beloved. And in verse 12, we shall look at the outer pshat as explained by Metzudat David, that she is saying, well, as she comes forth as the bride bedecked in these beautiful ornaments, while the king is still at the feast, her perfumes come forth, and then she speaks about his perfumes and her closeness with him. In the Talmud and in the Midrashim, it goes off in a different direction to say that his very praises of her in verses 9, 10, and 11 provoke in her a reaction in verse 12 of shame, that even while the king was still in his banqueting hall at Mount Sinai, having given her these decorations, even then already she put it in a very nice and clean way here, that her spikenard aromatic plant gave off its odor. That is to say, it left off having its sweet odor because of her sins. She is provoked into a state of shame by his very praises. Nevertheless, in the following verse, according to Midrash, God atones for her, and he is Eshkol HaKoifer. He is the bunch of the henna, which is kapara, atonement. That is the allegorical implication here, but that's not the way that Metzudat David interprets this love song. So let us go to the pshat according to Metzudat David of verse 12. Ad she'hamelech b'mesibo. All the while that Hamelech, that is her lover, the king, is b'mesibo, in his banquet, and this would, according to the context, be the marriage banquet. Nirdi nosan recho, the spikenard aromatic herb gave forth its fragrance. Says the Metzudat David on this verse, it's as if now the beloved is recalling what was at the time of this original marriage, as she starts recalling all of the subsequent history of what happens. Even there, she says, at the marriage feast, while the king was there, says Metzudat David, it's here as if the Chashukah, the beloved, sends her word. She sends a message to say to him, indeed, all the while that the king was resting at his banquet at the end of the meal, and then the normal way would be to bring before the king what in the Talmud is called the mugmar, the coals with the aromatic herbs being smoked on them and refreshing the atmosphere in the banqueting hall as the conversation at the table of the king would continue. And she says at that point, while the king was still there and the banquet was moving into this phase of aromatic herbs, that was when Nirdi Nosan Recho, my very beautiful perfume, gave forth its odor, and it was able to overcome the fragrance and the odor in the banqueting hall. And that is to say that the Nimshal, says Metzudat David in this verse, is that the very good deeds that I, the beloved, had in my hand were actually more powerful and stronger than the deeds of all the choicest of the pagan idolaters. And compared to them, even their their odors and their fragrances are overpowered by the fragrance and the odor of the beloved. So here we come into what is a very important part of Shir HaShirim, and that is the very concept of fragrances. We have repeatedly reference both to flowers and to fragrant herbs, and it's worth bearing in mind as we study these passages about these fragrances. Some words of Rabbi Nachman in his very last teaching in Likutei Moharan Part 2, teaching 8, where he speaks about how the souls of Israel have a fragrance which is terribly diminished if people malign the souls of Israel and reprove them in bad ways. And the important point is to allow the fragrances of the soul to be felt and experienced. So let us bear this in mind as we do study these sections about fragrance. She now goes on to refer to her beloved as the source of fragrance in verse 13. Tzror hamor dodili bein shodai yolin. Tzror hamor, the mor is the myrrh, the very fragrant myrrh scent, and the tzror hamor is the clutch, the bundle of the myrrh, which is actually closed up, like we describe money being closed up in the money pouch. The same word, tzror hamor dodili, is like a clutch and a bundle of the myrrh. Ben shodai yolin. Yolin in the future, let him sleep and rest between my breasts. So here we have the allusions behind our text here as we enter this world of odors, the allusions to complete yichud between the male and the female, between the Holy One, blessed be He, and His bride, the Shekhinah, all expressed in these very elusive ways. So on this verse 13, Metzudat David says, Tzror hamor dodili, my beloved is like a bundle of the myrrh. With all of that, as in the previous verse, my fragrance overcame all the others. It's not just that I won, as it were, the contest. She's saying, Tzror hamor dodili, my beloved is fragrant to me more than, or just as the bundle of myrrh, which, because it is bundled up and closed up in its pouch, so the fragrance remains there with this herb for a long time. It will not diminish, and this itself is even greater. His fragrance is even greater than the fragrance of my own spikenard, and that is why my love is for him. And what my desire is that he should dwell between my breasts, to have, that I may have delight in you. Because the word talin is, she's addressing him in the third person, Yolin, let him rest between my breasts. The Nimshal says that, says Metzudat David, the Nimshal here alludes to all of the, how God's goodnesses to her, the lover's goodnesses to her, were more powerful than all of her own good deeds. If she had the scent of the nerd, the spikenard, but he is the bundle of the myrrh, and that's why she desires to have this intimate closeness with him, where his dwelling between her breasts is a metaphor for the dwelling of the Shekhinah in Israel, for the dwelling of his presence in Israel. Well, indeed, the Targum and the Midrashim go into how actually the Shekhinah dwelled between the between the poles of the Ark of the Covenant, which extended to the screen between the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was, and the Holy in front of it, where the menorah and the incense altar and the showbread table were, and the two poles were jutted into the hanging curtain between the Holy of Holies and the outer, so that from the outer, where the ark was hidden behind the curtain, the poles appeared protruding very slightly like two nipples, and it was from out of the point between the two poles of the Ark of the Covenant, from between the two faces of the cherubs. From there, the Holy Spirit will come out into the Holy of Holies, and from there through to the Holy and out to Moses and all Israel. So this is her desire, that he should dwell with her, just like the Holy Presence dwelled in the Ark of the Covenant, in the sanctuary, in the temple. And verse 14, Eshkol hakofer dodi li b'charmei ein gedi. Eshkol hakofer, a bunch of the kofer plant, the henna, the very fragrant plant whose dye is used by the Yemenite brides until today, and other Oriental brides, as coloring to their skin at the time of the wedding festivities. And Eshkol hakofer dodili, she says, my beloved is to me like the bundle of the kofer plant with its bunches of the buds of the plant with their fragrance. Becharmei ein gedi, in the orchards of Ein Gedi. Ein Gedi, one of the most beautiful parts of the land of Israel, literally the Ein Gedi, the eye of the Gedi, the little goat or the little lamb, and the Ein is the fountain of water that comes forth, and the waters that are abundant there on the west bank of the Yam HaMelach, in the area of Ein Gedi, there is where there are fountains of water and springs and streams, there is beautiful natural fertility and fragrant herbs and odors. And since Shir HaShirim is indeed set in the Yerushalayim of one time that was like a little town with its town girls and the Bachurim, Ein Gedi is not so far from Jerusalem. It's a good hike, but it would be a place known by the inhabitants of a region for its great fertility, another reference to the great beauty of the land of Israel here in this verse. And the Metzudat David explains this verse. She's saying, you are, in my eyes, like the bunch of the henna plant that grows in the orchards of En Gedi, those bunches of henna that are abundant in their gargarim, their buds, their seeds, and the fragrance wafts far off. And the nimshal is to say that many wonders did you do with me, says Israel to the Holy One, blessed be He, wonders that were heard to the very ends of the earth. Well, we shall see when we come to study the Targum. He goes off an entirely different direction here on this verse. Amazing midrash that when the children of Israel were in the wilderness and they wanted to offer the wine libations on the altar of the sanctuary, they had no wine in the wilderness, but they came to Ein Gedi, to the Kramim, to where the vines were growing naturally, and took grapes from there. But we see now that we've come to the end of a short parasha introducing the mutual praises of the lover and the beloved. And this now, as we launch into the next parasha, we indeed come to another series of very beautiful love lyrics between the lover and his beloved. Let us run through this section with its simple pshat of the Hebrew and try to follow the outer mashal before coming to the detailed interpretations, verse by verse, of Matzudat David. So here if we have the text of Shir HaShirim in the Hebrew, without the vowels, we would be hard put to know who is talking. But when we have the vowels, we can see which words are addressed to a male and which words are addressed to a female. Launching now into verse 15, Hinoch Yofo Rayosi, we see that it's he addressing her. Behold, you, Yofo, the feminine form, Rayosi, again, my beloved. Hinoch Yofo Einaich Yoinim, you are beautiful, your eyes are like doves. The dove distinguished for its fidelity to its partner. And she rejoins to him after his praise of her. She sings back, Hincho Yofe Doidi. Behold, you are beautiful, my beloved. Yofe, the masculine form. Af Noim, you are pleasant. Af Arsenu Ra'anono. Indeed, Arsenu, our couch, Ra'anono, is fresh and full of vitality. So here again, the very delicate language of Shir HaShirim alluding to the yichud, to the union of the bridegroom and the bride, and depicting now their new life together in their home. Koros botenu arrozim, rahitenu beroisim. Koros botenu, the beams of our houses, are arrozim. They are cedars. Rahitenu beroisim. Our beams and our panels are from the brosh cedar tree, or I'm not sufficiently familiar with the English names of the species, but here we are alluding to the sanctuaries where the union between the Holy One, blessed be He, and His Shekhinah was present. And then she launches into this incredibly beautiful expression of who she is. And note that although verse 17 marks the end of the Bible chapter 1 and verse 1 of chapter 2 is marked as the beginning of a new chapter, there is no break in the Hebrew. This is all one parasha. And that's why it's important for us to learn it as a continuation. This is a mutual love song between one and the other. She is musing as she says what she is, expressing her innocent grace and beauty as they set out on their life together. The bridegroom and the bride. She says, "Ani chavatzeles hasharon, shoshanas ho'amokim." Here again, introducing the beautiful imagery of this love song. She is the chavatzeles flower of Sharon, the very rich and fertile area. Shoshanas ho'amokim, the lily of the deep places, which are watered and fertile, making the lilies fresh. The Shoshana is, in Hebrew today, used often for the rose, and there is some question about what is the exact identification of these different flowers mentioned here, but there's widespread agreement that the Shoshana would be a lily that has 6 leaves, shesh, and that's why its name is the Shoshana. Keshoshano ben achichim ken rayosi ben habonois. In verse 2 of chapter 2, it's he coming back to her now that she is musing that she is the Shoshana. He says, indeed, like a Shoshana ben achochim, my beloved is like the lily among the thorns. Ken rayosi ben habonois, so is my beloved among the maidens. And after his praise of her, she comes back in verse 3, Kesapuach ba'atzei hayar, ken doidi ben habonim, betzilo chimadati, v'yoshavti, ufiryo mosok lachiki. Kesapuach, like an apple tree, be'atzei hayar, in the trees of the forest. The apple tree, remote from where people are going to pull off its fruits and take it somewhere separate. People don't seem to go there. It's isolated. Dodi ben Abonim, so is my beloved among the lads, among the boys. And these are the other gods, either the angels on high, but my beloved alone is like the apple tree that nobody goes under because its shade is so limited. But as for me, she says, Betzilo chemarati v'yoshavti, in his shade I had desire and I sat. Ufiryo mosok lechiki, his fruit is sweet to my palate. So out of all this musing, she now returns to the essential bond between them. Hevi'ani el beis hayoyin. He has brought me to the house of the wine. This is the Torah that he's given to Israel. V'diglo, his banner, olai, over me, is the banner of Av, of love. Well, after all these enchanting love compliments going one way and the other, she faints backwards out of yearning and longing for her beloved. In verse 5, she can't take the intensity of her longing. She says, Samchuni bo ashishois. Samchuni, support me. Those she's talking to, these Benos Yerushalayim, the girls of the town. Samchuni, or as Matsudat will tell us, she's in her house and she faints out of longing, and she tells the people in the house, I need your support with these ashishois, would be flagons of some nutritious beverage. Rapiduni batapuchim. Rapiduni, an expression of ripud, of the covering over a chair or a bed. She wants to be supported by the fragrant apples to have their scent, having just referred to her beloved as the tapuach, the tree of apples. She needs to have this recollection, ki choilas ahavo oni, for I am sick out of my love. And she's in this state of musing, going back and forth, now recalling his great favor to her. Smolo tachas leroshi, v'mino tehabkeni. Smolo, his left arm under my head, v'mino tehabkeni, his right arm is embracing me. Here, an expression of complete bodily yichud. We had started with the neshikot, the stage of the kissing, and now we have come to complete to chibuk, to the hugging, and this is part of the process of the complete yichud between the Holy One, blessed be He, and Israel, expressed in these beautiful lyrical verses of love. And out of all this intensity, she comes up in verse 7 with a very remarkable verse, which we shall have to say a lot about. In verse 7, Hishpati eschem benos Yerushalayim. Hishpati, I've put you under an oath, you daughters of Jerusalem. And the oath is bitzavoos, by literally the deer, or ba'ailois hasodeh, or the female deer of the field. And let's remember that since she's imposing an oath, she's alluded to the divine name of Tzvaois, the God of hosts. But the oath is, as we shall see in the commentators, suggesting that if they break their oath, they will be open to the predators like the deer of the field. And the oath is im to'iru ve'im to'iru. If you will stir up and arouse the love ad shetechpotz, until it will burst forth. So having looked at the simple pshat and some of its overtones going through the passage, let's now turn to the Metzudat David and watch how he interprets this very, very beautiful love lyric. Going back then now to Hinoch Yofa Adrayosi, going back to behold, you are beautiful, my beloved, verse 15, he says, it's as if the lover, the Holy One, blessed be He, is sending his words to now praise his beloved. Verse 15, Hinoch Yofa Rayosi, Hinoch Yofa Enaich Yonim, you are beautiful, my beloved, your eyes are like doves. He's sending now his praises to her, to say how very beautiful her eyes are like the doves, which are so very beautiful and which draw forth love. They have a charm and a beauty of their own to bring forth the love. And the nimshal here, the meaning is that your good deeds and your worthiness, these are drawing the divine love to you. It is therein that your beauty lies. Going now to verse 16, where she rejoins to him, behold, you are beautiful, my beloved. It's as if the beloved is now returning her words to praise him and to say how beautiful you are in your appearance, and a thread of kindness is drawn upon you to be pleasing and beloved. And she says, our bed that you prepared from back then for our love. It would be the custom of the bride's groom to prepare the marital chamber in order to lie there and to delight in the exchange of love. This was beautiful and pleasant, just like a fertile and a flourishing tree. And the nimshal is that she's speaking about the goodness that you, the Almighty, have bestowed upon me from always, and it was always the most choicest, abundant, loving kindness, and your dwelling place in my midst, the midst of the assembly of Israel, over the cover, over the Ark of the Covenant, was the most delightful and beautiful. So again, Metzudat David is telling us what the Midrash will go off into great detail about, how the divine presence rested in the temple, and this continues in verse 17, where Metzudat David says that on the verse Koros Botenu Arozim, the beams of our house are cedars. He says the house that you prepared for us from way back then to come into, the beams were of planks of cedars, and the upper stories were where, when you go from room to room, there is space to move around, and this was made from the the other glorious trees, so beautiful to the eyes. And here the nimshal is at the holy temple that you prepared from back then for your dwelling place. That was the most wonderful and glorious structure. Well, we shall see that the Targum goes into a midrash here about the form of the future temple alluded to in this verse, and perhaps that's why the word botenu seems to be in the plural, our houses, reference to more than one sanctuary, not only those of the past, but to those of the future. Here the word rehitim, rehitenu, in Hebrew today, rehitim means furniture made of wood. The Hebrew word in the verse has a different kri from the ksiv. What is actually written in the text of the verse is the word resh chet tet instead of resh hey tet, and there is no Hebrew root consisting of resh chet tet. The Aramaic root of resh hey tet, which is our reading in our text, means running. And here we have in verse 17, Rehitenu Beroisim. The written in the parchment text is with a chet, but that's not the way the word is pronounced. We pronounce it with a hey. However, the letters of the ktiv, what is written here, resh chet tet, would spell out the word charat. Charat meaning to hew out or cut out, as or to inscribe, and the words of the commandments were said to be inscribed upon the tablets of stone. So perhaps here we can see an allusion here to that in the what is written in the text. But the Metzudat David is explaining the word rehitenu as the upper stories of the temple as a place that is wide, and therefore you can even run up and down there. Or he wants to emphasize that this is the space that exists there. There are various Kabbalistic allusions here to the batim of the tefillin, which are, the word rahit is also refers to a water trough, as we find in Genesis when Jacob is watering his flocks and the waters run into the trough where the animals will drink, and likewise the waters of divine influence flow down through the batim, through the houses of the tefillin of the head, which are said to be alluded to here in this verse. So going now then into the Metzudat David on chapter 2, verse 1, Ani chavatzelet hasharon, I'm the chavatzelet. Rashi tells us the chavatzelet is another word for the shoshana, for the lily, or other commentators call this the vered, the rose. So there is some difference of opinion about the exact identification of the flowers. But says Metzudat David here, now in this verse she is sending forth her words and speaking of the praises of her beloved in order to ingratiate herself with him through her praises. And she says, I am compared to the vered, the rose that grows in a rich and fertile soil where the rose grows to the very great beauty. And I'm like the Shoshana lily that grows in the deep places where the moisture is gathered, and this Shoshana has 6 leaves and never changes, always has the same form, this particular flower. And so I too always remain in my true inner spiritual beauty without changing. The nimshal, says Metzudat David over here, the nimshal of this verse is that the Knesset Israel, the Assembly of Israel, is saying, I always stay moist in my good deeds, and my hands hold firm in the commandments, and my feet stand in the straight path, one path that I shall not turn from. So her words now bring forth his reply in verse 2. Like a lily among the thorns, says Metzudat David, it's as if the lover sends his words to her now to say, indeed, you are like the lily to which you just compared yourself. And I shall add further on your praises to say that you are, as against all of the other daughters, namely the other nations, you are like a lily that stands among the thorns, so that nobody can ever get to her to spoil her beauty. And likewise, you too, with your abundant beauty that is in you, which causes many people to chase after you, to seek your love, nevertheless, you will never abandon the one that is close to you, your lover. And the Nimshal comes to say that all of the pagans are trying to tempt Israel to go after their ways and to Israel to join with them, but Israel never desires to do this. She will not listen to them. And then she comes back in verse 3, Ketapoch ba'at yayar, like an apple tree among the trees of the forest. There's a very interesting translation of this word tapoach in Targum, where he translates into Aramaic the word tapuach, which we normally think of as an apple, as etroga. And of course, the etrog is the pre-hadar, the fruit of glory that the Torah commands us to take on Sukkot. The word tapuach need not necessarily mean an actual apple as we identify the apple. In Hebrew, they call a potato tapuach adama. The apple of the ground. The word tapuach is from the same Hebrew word as nafuach, which would mean swollen, and the tapuach is a kind of swollen fruit filled with fragrant flesh. So ketapuach, like the tapuach, says Metzudat David. Now she sends her words to praise her beloved, and she says, you in my eyes are like the difference between you and all of the other bachurim, all of the other lads, the young men of the town. You're like the apple tree with surrounding trees that have no fruits, ilani srak, those that never produce any fruits. For even though the shadow of the shade of the apple tree is very little compared to the abundant foliage casting shade of other trees, nevertheless, I prefer this shade of your tree more than all the others. Your fruit is you produce fruit which the others don't, and that's why I have desired to be in your shade, and I've dwelled there even though the shade is less than all the others, because of the sweetness of the fruit to my palate, which was not the case with all of those other trees that do not produce any fruits. As if she's saying, compared to all of the other lads, I've may have found what seems to be only a small treasure, but nevertheless, this is where I desire to be, with the fruit of your wisdom, which is so sweet to my palate, and it's better for me to take refuge in the shadow of wisdom than in the shade of silver. And the Nimshal is that the Knesset Yisrael is saying to her beloved, even though the pleasure of a sin and the pleasure of the lives of the pagans may come very quickly in this world, for it's like the shade of a tree, where a person immediately goes into the shade of a tree with very abundant foliage and immediately has pleasure. Nevertheless, I have drawn my hands away from sin and from paganism, and I've attached myself to you only, because the fruit of the reward in the world to come is sweeter to me than anything, and even though it delays coming. Then on verse 4, Havi'ani el beis hayoin, he's brought me to the house of the wine. She is now talking as if to him, begging him to bring her to the banquet of wine in order for them to delight together, so that all will see his love for her. And that's why she speaks in verse 4 about digloi, his flag over me, the banner. She wants something to be seen by everyone, how his love is unique for Israel. She wants the flag to be lifted up to show to everybody that I am his and I am disciplined by him. And this will be a proof of his love for me. Here the nimshal is that I desire that he should bring his Shekhinah to rest in me in face of all of the pagans, to publicize that I am his alone, his people beloved to him. And then breaking in verse 5 into this plea now, out of all her longings, support me with flagons, out of all her longing that come to her, she calls to the people of her house to bring her flagons of wine to restore her soul, and to set forth her bed with apples which will bring forth a fragrant odor to heal her, because I am sick out of all this longing for my beloved. Here the nimshal is that Knesset Israel is saying to the sages and the elders, give me strength to all of those who are stumbling, and give us comfort that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, will indeed come back to Israel, because this is what my soul longs for. His left hand is under my head. I'm desiring that I should be attached to him as it was back then, and that he should embrace me with his love. Here the nimshal is that Knesset Israel says she's looking once again to the return of the Shekhinah. And we shall come in our next session to take a look at this very remarkable verse that follows. I've made the daughters of Jerusalem take an oath, the implications of this oath and what it means and how it was interpreted by our sages deserves more time in our next session.